Some of the business that might be very profitable and doing like decent growth in 2 years will be dead because of AI.
What to stop something like that SaaSpocalypse happening to Templafy?
If you have the smartest person in the world at your company, it doesn't mean that that smartest person in the company can necessarily just execute on everything you have, unless you're very deliberate on what you ask that person to do. You need to be really good at setting direction, and you need to be really good at validating output. If you don't do those two things best in combination, you're in trouble. As an employee, you can't compete. The brain is too big. You have to be good at directing and assessing. That's it.
I think AI is a force for good.
In the greater perspective, I honestly think
Christian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I usually do a bit of a background on my guests, but today I want to do things a little bit differently. I want to jump straight into what you do and what the problem is. So, with your company, what is it you do and what problem are you solving?
We're doing automation of documents. I've been doing that actually for quite a long while. And as many other companies pivoted into doing that a lot with AI. So the problem is essentially that enterprises that we work with are generating essentially millions of those documents, presentations, emails, spreadsheets, price quotes, contracts, what have we, and are spending a ton of time doing it. And there's a huge issue in terms of making sure that these things are consistent and high quality every time, especially when you go at scale. So that's kind of the problem that we saw. We reduce all the risk of that from the business side, and we give a lot of time back to the people that are doing them so they can do what they were actually hired for instead of doing business documents. And been doing that for a long time, as I said, but with different other methods through automation, through the different ranks of what's been happening around us. And today, very much AI first, as this is a content production output area, which is very, very suitable for AI.
Awesome. I mean, these are topics I want to get into today. I want to get into how you've integrated AI, how you've integrated now agents as well recently. But I want to take things back to kind of when you first started. From what I understand right now, you're serving over 800 enterprise customers. We're talking BDO, KPMG, IKEA, Adobe. These are all like case studies. When you first start this company and you're speaking to your first enterprise customer, what did the product look like at that point?
Well, when we started out very early on, it almost looked like nothing, I would say, because those were a lot of the conversations on. We transitioned originally from being consultants first and just acquiring the knowledge about what was the problem and could see these patterns on continuously with every single enterprise and also smaller businesses we spoke with, same things. For some reason, people just accepted to go through the cumbersome steps of doing all this, and having to go like building business documents by hand back then, and going through all the work with that. So we originally didn't even have a product. We built a product on the back of those requests, and then started to really piece it together, and consolidated a lot of that. Again, the knowledge of what was actually going on, what were the repeatable or recognizable problems across industries and geographies that were just there all over the place, and tried to really find a good foundation for solving that for a lot of companies at the same time with the first versions of the technologies we had. But when that came out, that was more utilizing, I would say, pre-AI, obviously, rules-based automation logics with sort of more classic software, obviously SaaS, but that was more using some of those methodologies, which were great because with those types of tools, you can provide tremendous efficiencies once you're done with all the configuration, having all the setups done. But it does require a lot of specificity to what you're trying to do. But that was kind of the world back then, and I guess we'll get into as well what has changed now that we have AI as a capability to work with too.
Mm. Those first customers, I know now you're working with a lot of like finance, law, pharma, people where regulations and having the kind of correct document format is very important. Back then, they're working as consultants and you're building this minimum lovable product. Was it the same thing? Was it the same customers?
At least it wa we had the same request from all customers, like, everybody was having the same problems, as I said, but the ones that had the biggest problem were the ones you mentioned right there, because not only did they wanna make sure that they could do this faster without the cumbersomeness, but it also had to be, like, hyper accurate with everything they did, and that was also a problem back then. It's not new. So it's been like that forever. You couldn't really do anything if you were in finance or a lawyer, for example. You kinda have to make sure that this was not just fast, it was also accurate in the output. And so quickly we sort of gravitated towards that whole sector where the efficiency gains were the request for that were quite obvious, but the other side of being compliant, being able to follow rules, not only doing what the users wanted to achieve, but also doing that while also butlering in everything that the businesses wanted to achieve for accuracy and precision and repeatability and consistency. All pretty much from the get-go, that's been our the core segment we've been looking at with these large accounting firms, law firms, financial firms that has these kind of regulated uh, underlying pillars that they have to adhere to.
Do you remember who the very first customer that bought that MVP from you was? Do you remember who they were?
Yeah, it's one of the ones you can't mention, but I can say it's one of the big four. So,
Okay.
I'll so I would say is that because they were the ones that, interestingly enough, actually back then, this was starting out with the whole cloud transition, actually the last big shift in technology. And interestingly enough, when you have those big shifts, the biggest companies with the biggest problems invest most heavily first when you're in those cycles. So this was one example. It was one of the, if you were to pinpoint one company in the world that they really want to have something to gain with that, this would be it. So they really bought into not necessarily the product, but the way we were thinking, because we understood their problems very deeply and kind of built everything that we built in terms of capabilities to support what were their, leaning in towards their requirements. So that was very important back then, and we're seeing some of the same now actually with sort of the AI transition. That is it's the biggest company that has most at stake that invest most heavily first. Whereas when you're mid-cycle and everything is more mature, you see the complete opposite, because then they don't want to buy anything except that Gartner or somebody else said this is the best, and you don't, don't have any risk on it. So now they kind of have to take risks, and when they don't have to take risks, they don't do it. So that was interesting. So it was one of the biggest companies in the world. Was actually the first customer. So yeah.
Interesting. I can see that logic of them having more to lose by not adopting this technology faster, right? But I imagine that going through that process of actually using it, adopting it is probably very slow. There's probably a lot of bureaucracy before this actually comes into effect. Is that true?
Yes, I mean, in general, working with enterprises, you see it's a lot less transactional than, of course, when you go lower market, obviously. But I would say, actually, again, when it at this stage of the cycles, like we are right now, again with AI, it's definitely a lot faster, and what the speed is driven by risk. If we don't do it, the others will, and we have to be ahead of the curve. So there's more willingness to take risks, but the way that that is being done in enterprise is really looking at like doing deep assessments and looking at the companies that have the right way of thinking and really understand what is actually going to be required. If I want to get here to here, what would actually be required? And we'll probably get back to that. So again, it's not only going to be quicker for me, or it's not going to be a toy. It's actually going to be a tool that we can use for business when we start using this on the other side. And if you can sort of prove that, that's when there is definitely much faster cycles than you would see when things are more mature, where there's a lot more deeper assessments going on in enterprise. So it's faster than it usually is, but still takes time.
Hmm. What do you think makes a company good at adopting new technology? Does it come down to the individual or does it lay on a cultural level?
Oh, it's certainly I would say it's on a culture level because it requires every time there's a new technology coming in, it requires you to a large extent, like unlearn what you've learned and do something else, and that's definitely something that sits in the culture. But then it's also back to the business and the decision makers in the business on how to then find the technologies that of course, actually moves the needle for people. So it's easy enough to understand and easy enough to adapt, and in best cases, in a way where it feels like a small step in terms of how you need to change your work, but a huge step in terms of what you gain from it, which is always the balance. So where things go wrong is oftentimes when there's something that is new and shiny and might be fantastic, but requires too much transition, especially in enterprise, because it's such a big thing to turn. And what we've done, to be sort of very practical on it, is that we've tried to be very adaptive into the existing tools that people are already using. For example, Microsoft Office, Word, PowerPoint, Salesforce, other areas where you'd be doing your work anyway. So it feels like just a little butler that does some stuff on top of what you were doing already. And it's quite deliberate that we've sort of, instead of putting out our brand as the big thing you need to see, it's been definitely more in the background and supporting existing workflows and just inherently accelerating that, which sometimes has I would say, the negative consequence that a lot of users would think we're part of PowerPoint, for example, sometimes, and it is, that's okay.
Talk to me about how that works. You have obviously these partnerships with Copilot, with Salesforce, with SharePoint, and with Microsoft 365. You're kind of sitting on this context layer on top of them. I think something that's, I mean, a big thing in the news right now is this whole thing of the SaaSpocalypse, right? So these plugins or these tools or and these applications that work with these big tech companies are just being swallowed up. What's to
Yeah.
stop something like you guys? What's to stop something like that happening to Templafy?
Well, first of all, I would say that is completely true, and you have to. If you didn't do anything in terms of considering how you would fit into the new sort of world order over the past 18 months, you would be in pretty significant trouble right now, I would argue. So we've, of course, been doing a lot of considerations on how is it that we fit into this and not just being another software tool that is going to be redundant, and it's not going to be relevant anymore. So for us, we've done two things. We've tried to stay very true to the end result that we're trying to deliver, which is still like ensuring that you have to get in a business context and the type of companies we work with, you have to end up with very accurate and high performing results in terms of business documents of different forms. Otherwise, you can't use it. But where we've previously been very focused on the formats itself, I think we've pivoted a little bit and gone more into, if AI is going to be the underlying factor that actually builds this for you, then the role we'll be playing is more on the instruction and orchestration piece in terms of how to use AI in the best way to make sure that you can actually have that do a lot of the work, but with business instructions to control the output in a consistent manner. So the end result from a user looks very much the same, except that it's 100 times faster to do, and probably, maybe has a even higher quality. But from a business perspective, what they really gain from still having using technology like ours, and I guess other companies are having the same approach, is that it is still this mid layer that kind of connects what the intent is from the user. Users trying to do this, and then we understand if that's what you're trying to do, then we need to sort of e- extrapolate that intent into something that is more like an instruction book to what should then happen. So this is like super prompt or instruction book that we can then provide to the best suitable AI to actually perform this task. So it's a mid layer for that, and we've even had those requests from companies that are like, it's great to use this orchestration and instruction layer currently to build very, very high grade business documents, but is there a possibility for us to use the same instruction layer for other type of AI tests that we have as well? So that is becoming like perhaps the most important piece in our business, the ability to instruct AI to get high quality at scale and in a very consistent manner.
You mentioned these companies asking you if they can use that for other tasks other than business documents.
Mhm.
What other tasks are they referring to? What
I
other
mean,
use cases is there?
yeah, the typical use case that they're asking, I'll start with business documents, which kind of explains what that is. That's a scenario where you have the outputs are in the millions in large companies, but you have a user involved. There's a user that originally sets the direction for what they're trying to do, and then somehow you need to translate that into something that also takes care of what the business is trying to achieve, and you get that whole consistency in the output. Um, a- and and that's kind of the problem, because if a user does it, the user would instruct an AI in terms of the prompt or things they upload, and it goes out there, you get some results. Might be good, might be bad. Next user next door tries to do the same, but he gets a completely different result, because every time that's kind of the logic. So other use cases where we ask to do things like this are similar, where there's a user involved that triggers off an event that uses AI. And the problem is to control the consistency and the quality on the back of that output. And that really ranges a lot from other types of content creation pieces and more on the creative side of creating ads and things like that to, or websites even, of doing that with AI, but with deeper instructions, uh, is like one ask that we're seeing, but it really ranges into a lot of different areas where you have this mid-layer user starts a process, and you have a business that somehow needs to get involved at some point. The way we used to do this before AI, you were kind of allowed to say, hey, we have some rules you need to follow. For that reason, when you go into create a document, you go here to do it. So you start on a intranet or you start in Word, you click that button, and that's what we told you do it. All of a sudden, ChatGPT comes along a couple of years ago, and people are like, that's easier. You start over here and just do stuff. And that has really changed your ability as a company to when you're allowed to enforce control. You can't do it on the front anymore. You have to do it on the back. So that's why when people do whatever they do, you need to pick up what they're trying to do, and then you can butler in the controls that you have. But it has to happen at that in that order, and that's why the instruction layers are becoming so attractive to somehow control that, so it doesn't just go in all sorts of directions. Yeah.
Got you. Talk to me about growth in recent years as these instructions and this layer of control and security becomes more important. I imagine that growth has probably exploded for you in the past 5 years as generative AI becomes more commonplace. I know for us as a newsletter, as a media company, when we first started this 2.5, 3 years ago, all of the sponsors we've seen were fun SaaS tools and marketing tools and all of these fun things you can do. And now, like the majority of our sponsors are security, compliance, data
Yeah.
security, stuff like that. So talk to me about that kind of transition with growth.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to what you say, because that transition doesn't happen overnight. What happens overnight is the shot, the what really is like, wow, the hype, like we saw with ChatGPT, wasn't possible yesterday, now it is. Wow. But it took surprisingly long for even large enterprises to kind of get into the thinking about, hmm, we love the speed, but maybe it's not going to do it alone. It's like that. That's now a default. But if we're to use it, we still need the quality. That hasn't changed. It's not like it's brain replacement to a certain extent. So what we were able to do before, just with more compositeness and rigid processes, we still have to do, because there's a reason why we need to rely on the accuracy in the output. But it actually took surprisingly long with it, even though we've had this narrative for 2 years from the get-go of when AI sort of really became more sort of generally available. We've been having the same type of talk, but we were surprised with how long it took before the real request actually started to come in. So companies, even enterprises, they had to go through the process of A, looking at all the general tools out there to that were originally more toys than tools, and assess them to figure out, okay, they were impressive, but actually we can't use them because there is just a different capability set that we require. Um, that process were there. And then another thing, going through the process of trying to build stuff on their own and building these internal built things like we've seen in other cycles before as well. That took a while before it's like, okay, now we understand that there's a new skill set that is still solved by, comparable to how software was actually built in the other cycle. It now needs to do something different. So I wouldn't say that we saw like 2 years ago, this just like a rocket ship. And at the same time, we also were transitioning our own companies from being very automation, rules-based led in terms of technology into something that is truly AI first and driven by that process combined with these orchestration methodologies that we have as well. But so the uptick is definitely there, like huge, but not as early as you would expect, actually.
Give me 30 seconds and I'll give you the secret to effective AI implementation. If you like the AI report, you already know what we're about. Cutting through the hype and helping leaders actually use AI. At Upscale, we're more than a newsletter or even this podcast. We work with global organizations like the Society for Human Resource Management and Fisher Phillips Law Partners to train entire departments, boosting efficiency and productivity by an average of 41% in just weeks. If you want your company ahead of the curve instead of chasing it, book a free strategy call at upscale.com. That's UPSCAILE.com. Schedule today and future-proof your tomorrow.
I think we've seen the same thing. We do enterprise training. So we train AI companies. We take 200 to 500 members of staff at a time, and we kind of teach them basic AI literacy and competency. And you would have thought that amongst enterprises, this would have been a huge thing 2 years ago, but it's only really seen massive growth within the past 6 months to a year. So there's still this kind of like, people try it, they maybe try to build some sort of AI system themselves. I've seen a lot of development projects go waywards and not work, and a lot of wasted money on that.
Yes.
So something you mentioned in there was this idea of the new world order. I was wondering if you could take me into your boardroom for a second. When you're talking about the new world order, where you fit in amongst it, what does that mean and what does it look like for you guys?
Yeah. Um, well, first of all, they're the clean losers in this game, and a lot of software companies that didn't consider this were defensive around how to deal with this, or just took the wrong decisions in terms of what to do in AI. I think they're in trouble in general. And then for a long time, it has been a lot about who has the best model, who has the best brain building. And interestingly enough, obviously, that has been gravitating towards is like, at least for general tasks, it's kind of similar. It's hard to actually see the difference between what they are. And now you're seeing more deliberacy on certain models being good at certain things and others being good at other stuff. But you kind of have clear winners in terms of that. It's an unwinnable game, probably for like normal companies. It's very difficult to be defendable if you're trying to go that track, because you're up against like massive, enormous players that are just super strong. It's kind of similar to what it was in the back in the day. If you wanted to, let's build a new PowerPoint. No one was ever really successful with that. A lot of companies tried, but it's just difficult because you're up against like such gravity towards certain ways of doing it. So the new open place that we definitely think is there, that is very underserved, is this piece about the brain is fantastic, but similar to, if you compare this to like a normal world, if you have the smartest person in the world at your company, it doesn't mean that that smartest world in the company can necessarily just execute on everything you have, unless you're very deliberate on what you ask that person to do. And it has to be very descriptive. So that piece of being very instructional in terms of what you're asking the models to do, and be very deliberate on which model you ask to do what, and which knowledge sources you drive in for which pieces, the way that you connect data sources and how you build it in. I'll give you one example of what we're actually doing there. So normally when you would, there's a lot of tools out there that do prompt to deck, for example. Put in a prompt, give me a PowerPoint, or typically not a PowerPoint actually, but some sort of deck. And the way that it happens is that you put in your prompt and maybe you upload some files, and then you let the magic happen and something comes out on the other side. Typically very impressive on the results. But it's really up to the model or this agent to do all the work. It has to kind of invent the wheel every time. And one thing that we do, among other things, is that we built these little, as I mentioned, these little instruction books. And those are comparable to actually having, instead of asking an agent to build the whole cookbook with everything you could ever imagine, we would just ask it to do like a very specific dish based on a recipe we already gave it. So, that's what we ask you. This is what the user is trying to do, but we translate that into something that is actually a recipe. And not only that, we would also, in that recipe, already pull in all the ingredients. So we've already aggregated all the data that needs to go in. We already connected to Salesforce and other places and just put that in essentially like an invisible document that is just an instruction layer for an agent. And the result is that instead of building its output on the back of 8 words from a user, all of a sudden it's 30 pages with very deliberate description of what we want you to do. So it's just an instruction book. And of course, that makes it a lot easier for any AI, also cheaper AI than the latest models, to produce much better outputs. So that's where we think that there is a lot of opportunity to compile these instructions much better and sit in that mid layer, which is essentially less about the AI itself. We also do that a lot in terms of being super good at outputting to PowerPoint and so on, but it's actually more about instructions. And even if you took that instruction and gave it to a completely different model, it would still produce a lot better results because the context, you mentioned earlier, context is king, because the context is a lot more precise and better. Similar to go to the smartest people in the company, give them a really good brief, they will do a better job than if you give them like a blurb. Easy.
Yeah. Help me think about this through first principles. With these instructions being so detailed and specific, how do you come up with those instructions in the first place? Is your competitive advantage the deep technical expertise? Is it the fact that you have very specific data? How do you come up with those rules in the first place?
Yeah, what we're doing there actually is that we leverage technology that we have for a long time, which is essentially our document compilation capabilities is something that allows us to say the user's trying to do this, but on the back of what they're doing, we might ask them a few additional questions. Those questions then trigger into essentially like a rules-based process that would trigger events that would go out and pull out very specific details on a certain customer. If this is a proposal, very specific details on what's happening in the market right now, other stuff that we might ask it to do. And then we essentially aggregate and compile a document dynamically that then becomes this instruction book. So nobody ever sees it except from the agent. Plus, it's written in agentic, so to speak. So the agents don't have to understand user language, even though it's beautiful that was the case, but oftentimes it doesn't. So it's written in a way we know the agents actually really understand. And so that's how we do it. It's kind of it's built on the back of rules-based automation logic, but it's used for informing agents with very high precision. So that's how we're able to do it. And depending on what you're doing, that might mean that we can pull out of what the user's asking in their prompt, so we don't have to ask them any questions. Or we could even trigger an event where there is more like gated questions we're asking them. You have to do this because we know that you're now on this track. Please give us this information, and then it does all the work. So it's AI doing all the work, but on the back of these, I would say, curated instructions that just puts it in the right direction. And then the advantage is that the next time some other users trying to do the same thing, they would be caught into the same type of track, where the same type of agents would be doing the same type of stuff, which means it's not exactly 100% the same because it's still AI, but it's very much, within this consistency frame that you can live with as a company. on top of being on brand and what have you, of course, but it's more on the content piece itself.
Really curious moving forward. You seem to be very forward thinking and understand the space in general to a great degree. I think a lot about how companies can become defensible. So, for example, something that happened recently is we had loads and loads of AI applications that were using AI to focus on people's health, right? And then 2 weeks ago, ChatGPT bring out ChatGPT Health, and then 2 days later, Claude bring out Claude Health, right? Connect all your data points, do exactly what these applications do. So for you guys seeing stuff like this in other industries, how do you become defensible in the next 5 years? And not just you, like in general, what's your thesis to how other companies can actually survive in this area of tech?
Yes, it's back to actually what I've been alluding to a couple of times now, because that's exactly it. Because these models are becoming so incredibly capable of doing these things, especially doing like very, very quick data analysis and connecting that with all sorts of information incredibly quickly, as long as it's available, typically publicly available or with other ways of actually getting access to this content. They can do these things, which makes it incredibly difficult to be defensible within anything. You know, and that's actually the reason why we've been less focused on, and I would with the other companies that I'm involved with and support and help and invest in, I typically advise them to be careful of being too much leaning in on the AI itself, because it's hard to defend, and more on the pieces that are harder to get to as a generalist tool, which AI typically is. And that again falls back to the orchestration layer that just allows you to get much closer to the actual use case and the specificities of what's required there. Because in the instruction layer, that what sits there is essentially also the ability to shift over. The second that you mentioned that ChatGPT comes out with a solution for health, and 2 days later we see Claude coming out with the same. If you have the instruction layer that would says, yes, we want to use it, but we want to use it in this way, we have certain specificities in terms of how we want to do it, you just switch over. As a company, you would say there's a new model that is smarter than this was the smartest guy in the world yesterday. Now there's a new smartest guy in the world. So you want to be able to switch over to that and then ride on the back of the race that is going on in terms of who has the best model. Plus, you want to be able to combine it. So for some things you use this, for some things you use that, for something, and just to be able to be very deliberate on exactly when you use it. So it's one step back. That's where it's software combined with AI to a large extent, but it's more the enablement almost of getting real value out of AI and getting it close enough to real use cases that actually puts you ahead of where you were.
Mm. Where do humans fit into this conversation? You have 800 enterprise customers. I don't imagine that you just sent an email out and you got a customer, right? There's a long process of securing an enterprise customer. There's a lot of back and forth. You're probably having to explain the value proposition. How important are humans right now in your process in terms of securing enterprise sales?
Humans are, in that sense, they're more important than ever in enterprise sales, because there was like some would say a beautiful time where you had to go to like one business buyer, and the person would say, for 100,000 people, this is now what you have, and you kind of forced it on top of people, which has very positively been challenged a lot because of these tools. And there is a ton of shadow IT going on, obviously, in companies for the same reasons, which I'm actually a fan of, because it introduces the real world, what people are actually asking. And now it's at a tipping point where it's so much, so you have to admit it as a business that there's a change in order. It starts with the user, and then you get, as I said before, you butler in what you're trying to do on the back of what the user's trying to do. So you need to provide them with tools, users with tools that they actually want to use. So they're incredibly important. If you don't have tools that are that a user would immediately pick up and start to use and get benefit from, you're in trouble, big time. So you cannot not have that. Then they're just going to go in some other direction, and that was easier to defend for businesses earlier compared to what it is now. It just goes rogue. So you've got to find the places where this is strong enough for users to want to. They get stuff done in terms of what they want to achieve, but as they get stuff done, you as a business also get to butler in what you're trying to achieve. That's essentially what you need to have, but it starts with the user. The other thing I would say about users and people and employees in general is that the capabilities of people have also shifted quite quickly because all of a sudden the whole execution layer is very quickly being taken over by AI. All the stuff that otherwise you would be spending hours putting together, for example, a business document, you can't do that anymore because your neighbor or your competitor is not. So that's out. So essentially it leaves two things for users. You need to be really good at setting direction, and you need to be really good at validating output. If you don't do those two things best in combination, you're in trouble as an employee, at least in information worker industries. So that also falls into this whole discussion on where technology then fits into that one. And I think they're in high demand. Those types of people, users that are good at those two things are highly requested because they can really utilize AI in both setting direction and also validating the output.
Can I ask a personal question?
Yes.
Do you have children?
Yes. 3.
How-
And a bulldog. Oldest is 16, boy 16, 2 girls, 14 and 9.
You're an investor in multiple companies. You're running this company. You're forward thinking. You're describing to me that the ideal human skill set is setting directions and being able to validate output. How are you approaching education for your children? What should they be learning that's different from what you learned?
Yes, I will start with answering that by a mistake, honestly, I think is happening right now in educational system, because they're also it takes a while for them to kind of adapt. It's not like they're against AI, but this whole notion that, students are cheating with AI, I think is very challenging, because in reality, moving forward, I think it's going to be like this anyway. Why would you want to go through the ranks and do all sorts of this, similar to what do you call that in English? The calculation machine that you have. I don't know what the English for is, but a calculator. The calculator.
Machine.
Yeah, maybe that was actually what it was. But you used to do like that in a very sort of manual way. And all of a sudden that was there, and it took a while for them to accept, okay, fine, maybe just do that, because you get to the same result. And that is essentially the same. If you don't put in the right information to a calculator, of course you can't rely on the result, and you have to be able to validate the result on the other side. So that is more what I'm trying to teach them, that they have to be careful, of course, due to the rules that exist. But the most important thing is this, like, use this new world and these new openings that are there to your advantage, and understand that the most important thing is that you need to be very deliberate on your purpose. You need to understand what you're trying to achieve, and you need to be really good at articulating that into a direction that you can have AI help with. And then you need to be able to assess what comes out at the other end and iterate over that until you are actually going to what you're trying to achieve. Not for everything you do, but things that where you have like a mid layer that previously would require different type of more cumbersome work. But I really strongly believe that those are the two things. It's too much to say, too much. The only things you're left for humanity. There's probably a little bit more, but as a knowledge worker, it's a big thing, because all the cumbersome stuff is, you can't compete. The brain is too big. You have to be good at directing and assessing. That's it.
Do you think university and college is less important than it used to be?
I think the requirements to what you do there is different, and to some extent scary, because question is, will you have, there's always like a middle of the bell curve type of layer of people, which is the majority that would be trained to do, as we've seen it up until now, a lot of the stuff that actually require the more groundwork, so to speak. And you've always had the people on the two ends that are setting direction or assessing and maybe doing both. But you need to push the top of that bell curve so you get more on the sides, because the ones in the middle will be in trouble. So that kind of put some stress, I would say, on the educational system, including for universities. Especially when everything on university is essentially like information worker, brain powered, knowledge worker types of jobs. So that's just going to be dramatically different in 5 years from now. The way that whole thing is, what is required, at least from the jobs that they would go out and get to. The question is then how quickly the educational system is prepared to adapt to this new reality, which I really think is there. It's easy for you and I to say because we see it so close all the time. And when I speak to even customers that are also very lean forward, it still feels like that there's a lot of things that they just haven't been exposed to yet. They don't know what is coming. But when you're really close to what's happening, it's hard to see how this is not going to be the outcome.
I want to take things back to you a second. I want to validate this information first, but from what I understand, you started as the co-founder, CEO, you moved to chief product officer at a point, and now you're CMO. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've always also actually handed that role over, but I was that for a while in Templafy. Yes, sure. Now
Okay.
I'm just a
Now,
co-founder.
now you're just co-founder. I seen that on your LinkedIn as well. I was like, is he being secretive about his title or trying to be simplistic? What's going on here? Um, well, my question was more pertaining to the CMO role. So I want to understand your thoughts on brand at the moment and how important brand is. We speak a lot about how we're leveling the playing field with technology, right? SaaS companies are popping up all the time. They are essentially running on the same brain. They may have a bit of a different body. So one of the layers of trust of whether they have customers or don't is like the brand, the recognition, and whether people know them and trust them. So
Yeah.
I think brands becoming more important, less important. How does that fit into the conversation in 2026?
No, I definitely think that still plays a very big role, because you're saying, especially what one word you had, there's like trust. Um, what is reliable around this, which is, again, it's the big theme. I kind of trust the output, but also kind of trust the company that is actually putting together the stuff that I would put all my eggs in this basket to make sure that this is something. And branding really comes into that. Not obviously just, having a glossy slide that looks good with a nice logo, but more the way that you communicate about yourself. And so what is coming back, I think, a little bit is probably the thought leadership piece in terms of what happens here, how to understand this. Similar to what it was in previous cycles, because everyone is trying to get their heads around this. And I think the winners, also from a branding perspective, are the ones that are strong in articulating what this means, and what this means also in a year and 2 years from now, in a context that is relevant within the space that they're in. And that is very closely connected to the brand. I think there are definitely strong examples as well of good brand leaders as well that is doing that job right now. So you're probably seeing some of the same.
Mm. What are you trying to communicate with your brand? When I go on your website, what are you trying to give off?
Uh, well, one thing that we're doing, if you're going to a website, again, like we actually a little bit of transition. I'll lead you into this, because we're 100% sure that where we're winning and where we're most important to the market and anyone we try to get to is in this piece of, obviously, speed for everybody, but let's have quality in the mix too, and in a consistent way, as I've been saying 10 times now. So that's the most important. But what is also important right now these times is that you get the what first. What is it? So the first thing you see there is actually, okay, it's I think it says something like prompt presentation for professionals. It's very specific on one thing that it does, and it's interesting because that's obviously just one part of what the company does, but it's very much the attention grabbing that you need to be very aware of. What is this all about? Because you have to get close to something that is not just, this is the general AI for everything you can ever imagine for anything. It has to be a lot more use case specific to something that is relevant in this context. And then very quickly after that, you have to double click and explain how you differentiate in that area to build trust, to your point, especially in enterprise. So again, as I've been saying a couple of times, if you're looking for toys, go here. If you're looking for tools, maybe more in this bucket, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So it's it's very important for us, and we've honestly as well iterated a lot over it and done a lot of changes to make sure that we stay close enough to this, and still like a lot of way to go to be yeah, to be strong enough in that communication. Branding is hyper important. Yes.
Yeah, I still think you've done a great job. That the best possible compliment I can give you is it's a very Danish-looking website. It's a very Copenhagen website, which
Okay.
like it just looks simple, clean. It works well. The UI is great, and yeah, I like the point you're making about kind of leading with that value proposition. Prompt PowerPoint for professionals. Simple. That's exactly what it is. Obviously, it's deeper than that, but something that comes off of my mind is obviously you're enterprise heavy. Was there ever a point that you thought about switching to B2C, or there's ever you thought about just serving that market in general? I know, for example, Gamma is a company that comes to mind that does something
Yeah.
even in the B2C market.
Yes. And the answer is yes. The one of the reasons actually we've been in enterprise is actually because when you were in rules-based automation logics, and that was the technology base you would be able to work with, that comes with a lot of configuration overhead. So it's heavy. So it's actually very difficult to serve smaller businesses and still make a business on it. It has to be at a certain size, otherwise it's difficult. And then of course we acquire a lot of skills to deal with that. All these enterprise grade stuff with all the certifications you need to have and security stuff and all that. That was kind of a prerequisite as well, which means that we're well positioned in that market. But Gamma is a great example. I think they're doing a tremendous job in their segment of just being out there to do like very cool stuff, very strong on their branding as well in that segment. And what is really driving a lot of their traction is this very, very user first, very attractive UIs that they have, very impressive outputs that they have, especially when it's like, I as a user need something right now and it needs to look very good. Let's just have it. Whereas what we're focusing on is mostly on, is a little bit more on, it has to be super quick and obviously needs to not look pretty, but it needs to follow the brand, which hopefully also makes it look pretty. But that's more depending on how your branding department decided that to be. And then ensuring that what actually goes in terms of context is something you can rely on. But where we see things mixing between these two areas, where the very user driven to the very enterprise driven, is definitely in the middle. So we have a lot more direct requests from much smaller companies than we've ever seen before. And we're also able to serve them much better because we don't have the same configuration overheads anymore. It's very quick to get started, much quicker than it was. And that means that we're blending more, and we're probably meeting more in the middle with companies like Gamma than we used to. Yeah.
You mentioned that you're on the board and you invest in a bunch of other companies. That's right.
Yeah. Yes, correct.
What kind of companies are these? Is it purely tech? Are you doing brick and mortar?
It's most of them, except for my Connemara investment that I have in a tiles company that does Italian tiles. All the other companies are tech companies. Yes.
Why Italian tiles?
It's just I think this is it's a company called File on the Pop, and you go to their website, you'll see what I mean. It's like it's just very, very. I like the people that are doing it, but it's also very beautiful and tangible. And one thing that I am considering as well is like, what's going to happen on the other side of this AI curve? Is things going to be like 8 people in the world owning the full world economy, and everything else has to be more like real product you can touch, or what's going on? So I guess there's a little bit of diversity going into that in terms of investment, but mostly it's because I just think it's very cool what they do. But the other companies are more because I can actually help them. I can do nothing at all in terms of helping this company, but the others, I've made all the mistakes, every single one through the last 25 years. So I'm trying to help them avoid some of those.
What do you think about you mentioned like VCs, there's fewer shots, but when they do have these shots, they're big moonshot. Where does private equity fit into this conversation? Because this is something I'm hearing the grapevine a lot, that private equity is continuing to grow. They're buying up a bunch of brick and mortar. It kind of plays into your Italian tiles conversation with you being involved in that sphere. What are you hearing?
Yes, I think for the moment at least, I think private equity has a better or an easier an easier play compared to VCs, because they inherently come in later. So it's when things are more mature, they have a bigger opportunity to look at what actually is going on. I know that you have different stages of VC as well, and that is helpful. I would say though that um, where that the negative side of coming in, that where private equity needs to be really on top of their game, is that they don't miss the boat almost, because some of it can also be like, yeah, it's going to be fine. We're still going to buy the same for the same metrics, rule of 40. This business was great. It's been around for 15 years. Maybe the cycles of businesses is just different. So I think sometimes they're underestimating that some of the business that might be profitable and doing like decent growth in 2 years will be dead because of AI. So some of them are not necessarily seeing that early enough. That is at least is one thing to be, I think, to be aware of. But if the ones that are, on the other hand, I think are in an easier spot to make good profits compared to VC. The VCs that make it will make unbelievable good results, but you will probably also see quite a few VCs that uh, you know uh, miss the best opportunities, and for that way, just miss hit and don't find that 1 out of 20 that just is a fund returner. But let's see.
I want to finish off with two questions. One very vague macro question and one very vague question about you as an individual. So I'll start with my macro. Do you think AI is a force for good?
If I was if it's similar to social media, obvious almost, is like, is the world a better place with AI in the greater perspective? I honestly think no. It's like one of those things that has been started, you can't get out of it. Probably the world was a better place before, because of what's going to come with it. It's there is a lot of great things from it. It's like always a circle at it that just grows. Your own narcissistic little you is in the middle, and things grow around you. And those are better and worse at the same time. But in this case, I'm afraid that actually the negative side will win for a lot of reasons we could dive into. So, but it's here, and it doesn't really help anyone to have that perspective. So now it's more like making sure that we do what we can to um, make the best of it in the close world, but also make sure that all those negative things are potentially not happening, or we can prevent them from happening, hopefully.
Mm,
But that was a long-winded answer, but yeah, that's probably how I look at it.
okay. I'm glad to see someone thinks the same as me. I am trying to ask all my guests the same questions to finish off with. And I had a guy on last week, and Peter Schwartz from Altana, and he was so incredibly optimistic about it. And I'm just sitting over here, my cynical, pessimistic self. You're like, it's great. He's talking about all the amazing things that we can do with the world and all of that. And I'm sitting over here cynical, like, I don't think it's going to be a good thing for society. But again, I adopt the same opinion as you, is that we can't really sit and complain. It's here now. It's not going anywhere. It's out of our hands. So you got to make the most of it, right?
Yeah. But let's root for all the ones that have the positive mindsets, and it's I totally recognize that. It's just, I'm half old now, so I've seen a lot. So I'm hopeful. Yeah.
My last question I ask again to every guest, I will not give you any further context. Take this question however you want to, and I would take 5-10 seconds before responding. Everyone takes this in different ways, so feel free to just take it however you interpret it. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I don't want this sounding wrong, but I told you before, in terms of, for example, the tiles as an example, there's certain things that has nothing to do with tech that I essentially love more. That I think is just, yeah, uh, music and those types of things. Obviously, friends and family, but this thing, I just have a certain skill set that also gives me a lot of positive. Uh, I don't know what the word is in English, but it definitely drives me something too, and I think that's true for a lot of people. Things you're truly just really good at, that is easier for most people. For some of the things I do, also comes with a certain types of responsibility, and that's not. I mentioned before the narcissistic person in the middle, and this can sound wrong, but I do think, there's parts of what I'm doing here, that I'm doing because I'm pretty good at it, and I want to make sure that we turn this into something that is valuable for me personally, for my company, for my colleagues, but also for customers and beyond. So I would say that's why.
Cool. A very practical answer. I like it. Christian, I want to thank you for your time, first of all. I appreciate you coming on and spending an hour with me. If people want to learn more about you, get in contact, learn more about what you do, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, if it's more on the company side, obviously templafy.com and website and doing all that, but very happy to engage with anyone interested as well on, with me personally. Catch me on LinkedIn. I don't know if the links have been shared somewhere, but very happy to engage with that. I love helping. As I said, I'm an investor in earlier stage company, typically tech companies. I like to support and help and spare and help people avoid mistakes that I've made. So very happy to engage with anyone interested.
Awesome. Christian, thank you so much for your time.
Of course, thank you.